Adrien was a 5-year-old, a precious, happy, normal little boy who vanished in 1972 on June the 12th while on a weekend outing in the greater Madawaska region of Ontario near Holmes Lake with his family and with a family friend. After 54 years, even today, little Adrien is still a missing person. Welcome to my channel. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel and welcome to an episode of Missing Kids. Today we are going back in time, back to the early 70s when little 5-year-old Adrien McNaughton vanished from the Holmes Lake area while on a camping trip with his parents, Murray and Barbara, and his older brothers, and I believe he might have had an older sister as well. And a family friend was also along for the trip. Stick around and find out the facts of this cold and unsolved case. Well, guys, Adrien was a bright, happy, normal child who came from a loving and adoring family. He was born into an era that treasured the young child and fostered its budding friendships. And because this is a cold case, I wanted to see where the guiding psychology of the early 70s, schoolroom philosophy, would take me in an exploration of trying to discover if, and of course we'll never have the answer to this, whether or not the psychology of the day influenced this child's disappearance, his actions, the actions that led up to his disappearance in any way. And I find that if it could have, this is a fascinating phenomenon, and I would love to explore it a little bit. But it is a cold case, and so bear in mind that we'll probably never know precisely what happened to little Adrien McNaughton. Now, it so happens that Calabugie Peaks, the area where the McNaughtons were staying, was populated by black bears, eagles, moose, deer, and other small animals like maybe loons and geese. And although the Northumberland forest is a beautiful terrain, it is also quite rugged, with treacherous landscape, it could pose, the very landscape itself could pose a very potentially dangerous situation for a young child who happened to get caught momentarily alone and who was unaware of the surrounding dangers. By the same token, it is also this area near Holmes Lake, the Calabugie region. It is known to be a beautiful and stunningly vivid piece of the world that is known for its beautiful forests, its wonderful lakes, and its amazing wildlife. In other words, it was a very peaceful and safe environment as well. So I didn't want to give anybody the wrong impression about that. And it just so happens that little Adrien is amongst the only people who have ever vanished in that area. So that should give you a pretty good indication of how well loved the area and how popular it has been. Although many details of the article don't specify, it is alleged that little Adrien vanished on June the 12th, 1972, approximately at 6 p.m. in the late afternoon as evening approached. And he was near the lake, Holmes Lake, fishing with his dad and his brothers and the family friend. And I'm not too sure if Barbara was along on this trip or if she hung back at the trailer or hotel room, wherever have you. I'm not sure where she fits into this story, except to say that she was quite distraught and traumatized by the disappearance of her child. And so what happened was, for about an hour, I would say probably around 4:35 p.m., this is when the child first sat down and began to fish beside his dad and brothers. And so he stayed there for quite an hour, and as you very well may know, many 5-year-old children may have a bit of a problem sitting still for that long a period of time. And so what happened, guys, is that as he fished, his line got a little tangled. Sometimes our fishing lines do. And what happened was he pulled back from the group. They were sitting on in one certain area, and he pulled back, went to sit by a rock to try to untangle the fishing rod and the line on the fishing rod. And at one point, he quit doing that. And so between that period where he sat on the rock and untangled his fishing line, probably unsuccessfully, and the time that he disappeared, we're not exactly sure how many moments or minutes went by. And so my question is, because the article didn't really specify, is where exactly were the McNaughtons sitting? Were they in a boat? Were they on a riverbank? Were they by the lakeshore? What were they, how were they positioned? And where was Dad, especially? Where was Murray? How close or how far was he from Adrien when Adrien began to distance himself from the group? And so how much time actually went by once the family realized that Adrien was gone? Well, guys, I don't think we're ever going to have a real answer to that, because all that we can absolutely make sure of is that by 6 p.m., little Adrien was gone. He was no longer on the rock. He was no longer seated beside his brothers and Dad. And he had sat still for an hour, and I guess he needed to run around and get a little exercise. And it would have been a beautiful evening, approaching evening and sunset. It was June the 12th, and so even though there were still some daylight hours left, it was getting later. Now, his fishing line was left over by the rock, and what happened was, what was deducted was that little Adrien therefore wandered away eventually from Murray and his 2 older brothers and family friend. And it is highly probable that he thereby entered a densely wooded area, and he was never seen again, guys. He basically virtually vanished. And so when Murray did notice that his son Adrien went missing, as I said, we're not exactly sure precisely how many minutes, or even if it was a half hour or so, had passed once he realized that Adrien had slipped away. And so we can't be too sure about that. Murray sent Lee, his older son, back to the family vehicle to check on the boy's whereabouts, and to see if maybe he hadn't returned to the car, maybe he got lost, or maybe he went to get something. But that hadn't been the precise direction in which little Adrien obviously headed. And so the police were contacted hours later after initial search proved to be quite useless. Unfortunately, from then on, little Adrien was never seen or heard from again. Despite a massive police search, which was carried out to find Adrien, and thousands of armed forces volunteers who stepped in with the hopes of finding the child alive, not a clue or trace of Adrien was ever found after that. And so, out of respect, I am keeping the mention of Barbara, the little boy's mother, to a very minimum, and respecting her state of distraught grief and overwhelming sense of helplessness. I'm keeping her right out of the story, because indeed she has been right out of the story, and she was not present right at the particular spot when the little boy vanished. She was somewhere else, guys. So that's what I gathered from the story. The legacy of little Adrien McNaughton, the missing boy who vanished near Holmes Lake in 1972 and was never found alive again, created an incessant pull to develop technology that would be useful and very helpful in assisting additional searches throughout the following years. And so 37 years later, in 2009, little Adrien's parents were still very actively involved in initiating a new search based on digitally developed technology. And at that time, I know that even the search for little Maddie McCann was still very hot on the trail. In 2016, 5 trained volunteers conducted another search dive of Holmes Lake, and 4 cadaver dogs noted human remains in the area, and a non-human tooth and the parts of the sole of a rubber shoe were found, indeed, 8 feet under the lake. And the lake itself, Lake Holmes, is between 35 and 40 feet deep in different areas. And so that didn't tell too much of a story, except that there have been accidents that occurred near Holmes Lake. And I'm wondering why other accidents weren't reported, or we have not been made aware of them. I'm not sure, but there were indeed there was an indication that other humans were found. And so they weren't precisely found, but they were detected by the cadaver dogs. By 2018, the 4th search was underway and conducted now with the kind of technology which is called a core sampler, and with the help of sniffer dogs. Although dogs did respond to confirm the presence of human remains in the area, those remains have yet to become tangible, visible, or even identified. So, which means that even though we can be pretty sure that there are human remains lying at the bottom of the lake, we don't know how many or whose they really are. The legacy and general consensus is that of little Adrien McNaughton is that foul play indeed is suspected, and even was suspected as early as 1972, because, guys, he simply vanished without a trace. And although there may be some logical explanations as to what could have happened to create that lack of evidence, the general idea is that there was some sort of foul play involved, perhaps by human luring, or even maybe by some larger animal. We're not sure what happened. We don't know. And so the case is wide open. It's never going to be shelved. It's always going to be an ongoing investigation, because the little boy needs to be found in order to clear up questions as to maybe other serial criminals out there who might have had the opportunity to carry out a specific sort of crime, or whatever have you. We need to find out specifically what the fate of little Adrien McNaughton actually was. Was it accidental? Was it deliberate? We don't know, but we want to find out. And now, 54 years later, the hard reality is still this wonderful and amazingly beautiful region is known to house certain wild animals and very dangerous sea creatures as well. Sea creatures such as sea lampreys and stone cats. Although these particular species of fish don't really attack humans, we don't know what might have happened should the child have fallen into the water. We can't be sure, right? And so these particular species of fish, the sea lamprey and the stone cat, they tend to feed on blood. And so, yeah, there you go. Also are spotted in the nearby areas around surrounding Lake Holmes are a massive amount of eagles who like to nest in the tall trees surrounding Lake Holmes, and black bears, cubs, adults, deers, and other small mammals, as I mentioned before. And so any of these larger birds might have been able to swoop down and snatch them up, and or if it was a bear or some sort of bear cub, he might have been able, the animal might have been able to carry little Adrien to a den. We don't know if there were any bear dens there at the time nearby, if they were checked, if they were ever found, we don't know. But these are indeed possibilities that are always, that present a risk, no matter how young the person is. There's always going to be a certain amount of risk when you bring a child out to a beautiful natural environment such as this. So yeah, the possibilities are almost limitless. And so that is the story of little Adrien McNaughton, and I am so surprised that we don't have any further details of what the search actually entailed. I'm sure it was carried out on a massive scale, but I did go through other articles which basically outline the same details. So that's about all that I have for you on this very sad and tragic case. The educational goals of the 1970s classrooms in Ontario underwent a very significant transformational shift. Classroom learning plans moved away from structured, traditional learning norms and introduced a very student-oriented and independent learning style for the child. Gone were the four-wall classrooms of the 50s and 60s. Classrooms enveloped multiple grades and almost did away with textbook learning. The dynamics then focused on grouping and collaborative learning experiences. I remember this shift and how my childhood school moved my grade into a new school with humongous classrooms. Because my own learning style thrived on individual teacher attention, I did not fare very well in the open classroom concept. But in 1972, little Adrien was only starting out, and it is likely he had already been introduced to such independent learning styles by the time he took that camping trip with his family in June. Therefore, it is no surprise that he would wander off after sitting still for an hour and explore the beautiful natural surroundings of Lake Holmes on his own. Whatever happened to this happy, curious, inquisitive child may very well never be known, but it is apparent that he was carrying out whatever actions seemed typical to him at the time, that whatever course he took to satisfy his curiosity ultimately likely took his life is very tragic and also unsettling. Thank you so much for listening and watching.